Hi, I'm Ethan, and this story is about how I finally broke free from a toxic family dynamic that haunted me for most of my life. Growing up, my family wasn't what you'd call conventional or supportive. Far from it. If you can call a group of people who constantly overlook and undervalue you a family, then maybe they were. But for most of my life, I felt more like a shadow than a son. My parents, Kevin and Sandra, have two sons, me, the eldest, and my younger brother, Ryan. From the day Ryan was born, it was clear who the favorite was. Ryan was the golden child, and I was, well, just there. While Ryan was born with chubby cheeks and a laugh that charmed everyone around him, I was the quieter, skinnier kid who was easily overlooked. For some reason, my parents seemed to think that Ryan's charm and good looks made him more valuable. As Ryan grew, the favoritism became glaringly obvious. Birthdays were a stark reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy. Ryan's parties were extravagant, complete with themed decorations, tons of gifts, and all the attention a kid could want. My birthdays? They were little more than a footnote, a candle on a cupcake, and a quick, half-hearted, happy birthday. In school, I worked hard to prove myself. In third grade, I earned straight A's, an accomplishment I was genuinely proud of. I rushed home to show my report card, hoping for at least a pat on the back from my parents. Instead, my mom glanced at it, said, "That's nice," and immediately shifted the conversation to a drawing Ryan had made in class, a lopsided picture of a dog. That drawing went on the fridge. My report card? Tossed into the junk drawer. Ryan, on the other hand, thrived under the constant praise and attention. His every minor achievement, winning a participation trophy, making a messy craft project, was celebrated like he discovered a cure for cancer. My parents spoiled him with new toys, trips, and everything he asked for. Me, I got the basics. No frills, no extras. The imbalance didn't just stop at material things. It extended into our daily lives. Ryan had a say in everything. What we watched on TV, where we went for family vacations, even what we ate for dinner. My preferences were ignored, and if I dared to protest, my parents dismissed me, or worse, Ryan would throw a tantrum, and I'd end up being blamed for causing a scene. To make things worse, Ryan wasn't just the golden child. He was also a bully. You'd think an older brother would be the one picking on the younger sibling, but no. Ryan made it his mission to make my life miserable. He'd steal my stuff, humiliate me in front of others, and mock me every chance he got. My parents, they either turned a blind eye or justified his behavior with a dismissive, "He's just a kid." By the time I hit my teens, I'd learned to endure the neglect and favoritism in silence. I knew there was no point in fighting it. I became the invisible son, the one who kept his head down and avoided confrontation. But deep down, I was biding my time, waiting for the day I could escape. That opportunity came when I was 18. I'd worked hard in school, and my efforts paid off when I landed a scholarship to one of the top colleges in the country. It was everything I dreamed of, an escape from my family and a chance to build a better future. But when I shared the news with my parents, their response was crushing. Instead of congratulating me, they said I should decline the offer and attend a local college. Why? Because Ryan, who was struggling academically, might feel jealous if I went off to a prestigious university. The irony was laughable. My parents were asking me to sacrifice my future for the feelings of the very brother who had spent years making my life a living hell. I didn't fight them outright. I'd learned by then that arguing with my parents was pointless. Instead, I played along. I told them I'd attend the local college, but only if I could live in the dorms. They agreed, thinking they'd won. Little did they know, I had no intention of following through. I packed my bags, accepted my scholarship, and moved to another state. My parents believed I was just a short drive away, studying locally, while in reality, I was thriving at one of the best colleges in the country. The scholarship covered most of my tuition, and I used the money my dad sent for local college fees to cover my living expenses. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I was no longer the invisible son, the shadow in the corner. I was Ethan, the hard-working, determined student carving out his own path. But even as I flourished, a part of me still longed for the family I never really had. That longing would come back to haunt me years later, when my father called out of the blue, demanding that I return for Ryan's wedding. Little did they know, I wasn't the same Ethan who'd left home years ago. And this time, I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. I'll be honest, when my father called and demanded I come home for Ryan's wedding, it caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of surprise where you feel joy or excitement. It was the kind that fills your stomach with dread. After all, this was the same man who had spent most of my life ignoring me. Now suddenly, I was family and expected to drop everything to play my part in Ryan's big day. Ethan, your brother's wedding is next month. You'll need to come home early to help with the preparations, my dad said, his tone commanding as usual. There was no question, no consideration, just an expectation. I hesitated before answering. I'm really busy with college right now, I lied. I'm not sure I can take time off. Busy with college? He scoffed. We've been paying for that, haven't we? You'll make time. This is important. That word, important, it rolled off his tongue so easily, as if it had ever applied to anything involving me. For as long as I could remember, my achievements were never important. My struggles never warranted attention. But now, out of the blue, I was expected to bend over backward for the family that had barely acknowledged my existence. I didn't commit to anything on that call. Instead, I told him I'd think about it and hung up. The nerve of this man, I thought. My father had spent years teaching me that I was nothing more than a supporting character in Ryan's story. Now, he wanted me to help make the golden child's wedding look perfect for friends and relatives who didn't even know I existed? It was absurd. Still, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Was this his way of trying to repair the broken relationship? Was he finally recognizing me as his son, an actual member of the family? I knew better than to let those thoughts linger for too long. This wasn't about me. It was about appearances. My father didn't care if I was happy or successful. He cared about how the family looked to outsiders. Over the next few days, the calls and texts came flooding in. My mom chimed in, trying a different tactic. Guilt. Ethan, she said over the phone, her voice dripping with fake concern. Ryan would be so hurt if you weren't there. He's your brother. Family is everything. Don't you want to be there for him on the most important day of his life? I could feel the weight of her manipulation pressing down on me. Ryan never cared about my important days, I replied calmly. Why should I care about his? There was silence on the other end before she sighed. You only get one family, Ethan. Don't let something like this come between us. I held my tongue, though I wanted to laugh at the irony. Come between us? There was nothing to come between because there was nothing there. For years, they had made it clear where I stood in their priorities. Now suddenly, they wanted to act like we were one big happy family? I wasn't buying it. Then my father called again, this time switching to threats. If you don't show up, I'll stop paying for your college, he warned, his tone icy. That was when I knew they hadn't changed. This wasn't about family or love or reconciliation. It was about control. They were trying to strong-arm me into doing what they wanted, just like they had my entire childhood. What they didn't know, though, was that I wasn't the same kid they used to push around. I had outgrown their games. I snapped. Go ahead and stop paying, I told him, my voice firm. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not coming. There was a long pause on the line before he blustered. You think you can defy us like this? We'll see about that. I hung up before he could say more. It felt like a victory, standing up to him like that. But I also knew it was far from over. Sure enough, my dad followed through on his threat. Sort of. He went to the local college I was supposedly attending to withdraw my enrollment. The problem? I had never been enrolled there. I can only imagine the look on his face when the admissions office told him there was no record of me. He called me again, furious. Where the hell have you been all this time? What have you been doing with the money I sent for your tuition? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I took a deep breath and let the truth spill out. I graduated a year ago, I said. I've been living in another state and working a 6-figure job. The money you sent, it helped me with living expenses, so thanks for that. There was stunned silence on the other end before he finally asked, Are you serious? Completely, I replied, my voice steady. I didn't need your help to succeed. I did it on my own. He exploded. The betrayal, the humiliation, he felt it all, and he wasn't shy about letting me know. But I didn't care. For the first time, I had the upper hand. He tried one last tactic, demanding I come to the wedding to restore the family's image. That's when it all became clear. This wasn't about love or reconciliation. It was about damage control. My parents wanted me there to keep up the illusion of a perfect family. I told him no. No to the wedding, no to the charade, no to pretending that everything was fine. And when he kept pushing, I hung up and blocked his number. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over them. But this was just the beginning. What came next was the unraveling of everything my parents had built, and the fallout was far more dramatic than I could have ever imagined. The days after my father's meltdown were oddly quiet. I expected more calls, more attempts at guilt-tripping or manipulation, but there was nothing. A part of me thought maybe they had finally given up. But deep down, I knew better. My family wasn't the type to let go of control that easily. It wasn't long before the silence broke. My phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my mother. She was sobbing. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking, "we just want our son back. Can't we move past all of this? None of it matters. You're still our family." I sat there stunned. My mother, who had ignored me for years, was suddenly desperate to reconnect. It didn't sit right with me. There was no way this was just about family bonds. Something else was going on. "I need some time to think," I said, keeping my voice neutral. I hung up before she could say more and immediately called my aunt, my mom's sister, the only relative I had ever felt a real connection with. "Aunt Clara, do you know what's going on?" I asked. "Mom called me, and it just feels off." "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice heavy with exasperation. "You're not going to believe this." She wasn't kidding. The story she told me was more dramatic than any soap opera I'd ever seen. Apparently, Ryan's perfect fiancée wasn't so perfect after all. Just weeks before the wedding, she convinced Ryan, my parents, and several other relatives to invest their savings in some once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Turns out it was all a scam. She took the money, every last penny, and vanished without a trace. The wedding canceled. The fiancé gone. My parents' savings wiped out. But that wasn't the worst of it. Aunt Clara explained that my dad's business, which had already been struggling, took a massive hit after he got into a public altercation with an employee. The fallout cost him a major contract, and the business was on the verge of bankruptcy. Desperate to stay afloat, my parents had put their house up as collateral for a loan. Now, with no money and no income, they were on the brink of losing everything. "Ethan," my aunt said, her voice softer now, "I think that's why they're reaching out to you. They're in deep trouble." It all clicked. The sudden calls, the fake concern, the desperation. It wasn't about me. It was about them. They had no one else to turn to, and now that their golden child had let them down, I was their last resort. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity. Despite everything they'd put me through, they were still my parents. But then I remembered all the times they had made me feel invisible, all the sacrifices they had demanded for Ryan's sake. They hadn't reached out because they cared about me. They reached out because they needed something from me. The next day, my suspicions were confirmed. My parents showed up at my apartment. I don't know how they got my address. Maybe they pressured an old friend of mine. But there they were, standing on my doorstep, looking defeated. My mother was the first to speak. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We're in a bad place. We need your help. You're our son. You can't just abandon us." My father, ever the prideful one, tried to sound composed, but his desperation was clear. "We raised you. We gave you everything. Now it's your turn to give back. Family supports family." I laughed bitterly. "Family supports family? That's rich coming from you. When did you ever support me? When I needed you, you chose Ryan every time. Now you want to guilt me into saving you?" My father's face turned red, but he didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth was undeniable. "Look," I continued, my voice cold, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I'm not your safety net. I've worked too hard to build my life, and I'm not going to let you drag me down." My mother started crying again, but I wasn't moved. I had spent my entire childhood crying over their neglect. Their tears didn't change anything now. I closed the door in their faces and locked it. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of power. They couldn't control me anymore. But it didn't end there. A few days later, Ryan himself showed up. He looked nothing like the cocky, arrogant brother I had grown up with. He was disheveled, his eyes red from crying. "Ethan, please," he begged. "I know I was a terrible brother, but I need your help. Mom and Dad are cutting me off because they blame me for everything. I don't have anyone else to turn to." I stared at him, the irony almost too much to bear. The golden child, the one they had coddled and praised while they ignored me, was now the scapegoat for their failures. "I'm sorry, Ryan," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But you made your choices, just like I made mine. I can't fix this for you." I shut the door on him, too. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had spent my entire life being overlooked and undervalued. I wasn't going to let them use me now that it suited them. Since then, I've blocked all their numbers and cut off all contact. It's not an easy decision. I still feel the void of not having a real family, but it's the only way to protect my peace. They've made their choices, and I've made mine. I finally reclaimed my life, and I'm not looking back.